Here to help unravel matters as the insanity swirls. And unravel I shall. What happened to Omarosa, by the way? What happened to John Brennan and his security clearance? You see how quickly the media jumped from one supposed scandal to the next? They grab one, then the other, hoping somehow, some way that one of them will bring down this president. So now we're focused on the Michael Cohen matter. An impeachment. What was once considered the nutty rantings and ravings of a nut job by the name of Maxine Waters has now gone mainstream in the media. They want the president impeached. They've always wanted him impeached. If they could, they'd have him hanging from a telephone pole by his foot, as we've discussed before. But that's not in the cards. Now we have this breaking story that some guy named Weisselberg, who was the CFO of Trump Foundation and Trump Organization and whatever, that now he has been granted immunity, like the head of the National Enquirer, Pecker, has been granted immunity to, among other things, confirm what Michael Cohen has said about the President of the United States making payments or ordering payments on these non-disclosure agreements before he was president. As a legal matter, listen to me, as a legal matter, it's of zero consequence. Because in the end, the Department of Justice acknowledges, as does the special counsel, that a sitting president cannot be indicted. So that's relevant, isn't it? So as a legal matter, it's irrelevant. So what's going on here? We discussed it yesterday. What these prosecutors have decided, Mr. Mueller and what's-his-face, the deputy U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York. You know why the deputy U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York is in charge of these cases? Because the U.S. attorney has recused himself. My point to you was that Donald Trump is now the only citizen in the United States who can't defend himself. Now, you might say, well, then he should allow that a president can be indicted. He has to defend the office of the presidency and the Constitution. So for him, it's not about him personally. But for the prosecutors, it is about him personally. And this is how they think, very cleverly, that they're boxing him in. And so when I hear supposedly smart people on TV and radio with law degrees, some of them are professors, some of them were professors, some of them were prosecutors, some of them were defense counsel, some of them were lobbyists, some of them were nobodies. Go on and on about the niceties of the campaign laws of which they know nothing. It really is frustrating. Because what's happened here is diabolical and evil. Mr. Mueller concedes the president can't be indicted. Southern District of New York must take the same position. Ultimately, they report to the United States Department of Justice. And so they're piling on. And they're not piling on through actual trials in the case of the Southern District of New York. See, the trial that took place with Manafort has absolutely nothing to do with the President of the United States. But if they had taken Cohen to trial and tried this argument that the President of the United States, in making these payments, knowingly or later knowingly, is guilty of these campaign violations, they'd have to prove it. They would have to demonstrate that these are in fact campaign violations, that in fact the law is as the prosecutor says. But the Southern District of New York is filled with cowards, bullies, but in the end cowards. Because they wanted to deal with Michael Cohen, and Michael Cohen wanted to deal with them. Because Michael Cohen didn't want to go to prison for 30 years. 3 to 5, that's all right. And there's some reports that say that his wife would have gotten caught up in this and he didn't want his wife to go to prison. Fair enough. You're the prosecutor. You're sitting across the table by a gentleman by the name of Lanny Davis. You know, he hates Trump. And so you press Cohen. Okay, 5 tax frauds, 1 bank fraud, 2 campaign frauds, and a partridge in a pear tree. You take it? We'll give you 3 to 5. I'll grab it. Yeah, take it. And so his plea agreement, which has no precedential value whatsoever, it's not an adjudication, it's not a determination by any court, then is used, what? For the media. The media say what? See that? He must be an unindicted co-conspirator. If Cohen's guilty, Trump must be guilty. Of what? Of campaign violation. But he didn't violate the campaign. Yeah, but Cohen and the prosecutors said they did. Who cares? Next up, the head of the National Enquirer and that business empire. We heard yesterday he was granted immunity. Immunity for what? Well, he testified in front of the grand jury. About what? We don't know. They don't tell us, but they know he testified, so the leaks are coming out. Well, theory is, or at least the thinking is, he confirms what Cohen said, that Trump made these payments. Well, so what? The payments are perfectly legal. Wow. No, you don't understand. Trump says that he didn't direct these payments to be made, that Cohen made the payments, and later he made the payments, and he violated the limits on personal contributions, and he violated the exclusion of corporate contributions. Whoa. Who says any of that occurred? Trump didn't make a corporate contribution to his campaign. His company, in part, his organization, in part, apparently paid one of the women for a non-disclosure agreement. And then he paid out of his pocket for another non-disclosure agreement. What does that have to do with campaign finance laws? Well, you see, the way we interpret it is it influenced the election because he was trying to get rid of a negative story to make it a positive. Whoa. That's not what the law says. That's not what the law is. Well, prosecutor says it is, and Michael Cohen pled guilty to it. Must be the law. Now we have this guy, Weisselberg, a.k.a. Weaselberg. Been with the Trump Organization and the Trump Foundation, I suppose, for decades. Chief financial officer. Prosecution says now, at least one of the payments Trump made came out of his organization. Let's get a hold of this chief financial officer, Weisselberg. Let's shake him down. Let's threaten him. And then we'll offer immunity if he testifies against Trump. What do you mean testifies against Trump? Well, what we mean is that he too can say that a payment came out of the Trump Organization, and of course it's our position that that payment was illegal, an illegal corporate contribution to a campaign. But it wasn't a contribution to a campaign. It was a payment for a non-disclosure agreement involving a matter that occurred prior to the campaign. Wow, that's not how we interpret it. You can interpret it any way you want. You haven't had it adjudicated. I know of nobody in the country who's been convicted of such a charge. No adjudication, no trial, just assertions and a plea agreement and 2 immunity agreements. So they're piling up. They're piling up these, what will be allegations against the President of the United States, even though they know they will never be adjudicated as applies to him. Never. Which is why this is such a disgusting outrage. He can't defend himself, the president, in a court of law, and he shouldn't, because he's trying to protect the office of the presidency and the Constitution. Our presidents will be in court all the time on criminal matters. You see, the Bill Clinton matter was a civil case. There was a criminal element to it, because in the course of the civil case, he lied to a federal judge. That's not this case. Everything we're talking about occurred prior to the time Donald Trump was president of the United States. Now, Mr. Mueller will put his report together. He will include what's going on in the Southern District, or he won't. The Democrats will pick it up if they take the House of Representatives and run with it anyway. And a mere plea agreement and 2 immunities, They will claim our evidence of the president's violation of the campaign laws, even though there's been no trial and no adjudication, and there can't be, as applies to him. That's how devious and evil this is. But it gets worse. See, I could sit here and, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. No, I'm telling you what's going on. How is it worse? The Southern District of New York has now opened the back door to investigating the Trump Organization and the Trump Foundation. See how this works? You break down Cohen on campaign charges, among other things. You get the head of the National Enquirer to support Cohen's position. Otherwise, he's threatened with jail time. Then, because a payment that's perfectly legal came out of the Trump Organization, because after all, Trump does own the Trump Organization, but it's a corporation, comes out of the Trump Organization, the prosecutor claims that it's a violation of federal law. They threaten the CFO. He gets immunity. He complies with the prosecution. And now they get a hold of the Trump Organization. Now they get a hold of the Trump Organization. This all started by Mr. Mueller, who threw the case to his colleagues, who he knows well, in the Southern District of New York, because he knew that under the Appointments Clause of the Constitution, which I brought up multiple times on this microphone, if he goes so wide, then the president will be able, and others will be able, to make a serious and legitimate case all the way to the Supreme Court that everything Mueller has done is null and void. So he throws it to the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York, in Manhattan, who does his dirty work for him. Ultimately, to get into the Trump Organization. Everybody's missing this. I am explaining it to you. This is a huge miscarriage of justice. It's incredible abuse of power by these prosecutors. They're politicizing these investigations. Mr. Mueller has closed his eyes to what the Clinton campaign and the DNC did, about the Russian dossier, and all the rest of the list that's repeated ad nauseum. He hasn't even attempted to expand his investigation to include any of that. He hasn't even requested, apparently, to expand his investigation to include any of that. What this week's activities demonstrate out of the Southern District of New York is that this was always a Soviet-style prosecution. Always. Now, I know that offends some of my faint-of-heart conservatives who desperately want to be patted on the head and write columns for the New York Times or have columns written about them. Well, screw them. This is the time to be serious people. Serious people. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.